Stephen Wiltshire from London is a star among savants. His nickname is the Living Camera. Stephen is autistic. He lives in a world of his own. Communication is difficult for him. He didn't speak his first words, pencil and paper, until he was 5. Yet when he was 11, he drew a perfect aerial view of London after only one helicopter ride. Even the number of windows in all the major buildings in his drawing was correct. For this film, we're testing the living camera in Rome. Stephen has never seen the Eternal City from above before. After only a 45-minute helicopter flight, we'll ask him to draw a 5.5-yard panoramic picture of the historic city centre. Without having a second glance at it, Stephen has 3 days. In these 3 days, Stephen will have to keep thousands of details in his head. The innumerable cupolas, the tiny winding streets, all the balconies and windows of the endless array of houses, and each and every column and window arch of Rome's major sites, from the Pantheon to St. Peter's to the Colosseum. Stephen has never trained for this feat of magic. The miracle simply happened when he first started to draw. Yet none of us would have bet that Stephen would be able to draw Rome just from memory. 5.5 yards of paper can look scarily empty. Yet Stephen's sister Annette, who helped him come to Rome, is much more optimistic.
He's able to absorb a lot more that we would normally filter out that's not important to us. And somehow, I don't know, like a video recorder, just record what he needs, rewinds back to what he wants, plays, and it just comes out on paper.
They are surprised that we are surprised. I think that it comes to them very naturally, just as kind of in quotes, normal human behaviors come to us. And just if somebody were to ask us, well, how come that you can walk a straight line between wavering to the left or to the right? We would say, well, what do you mean, how come? It's simple, it just happens by itself.
In order to compare my abilities to Stephen's, I also need to have a look at the aerial footage of Rome and draw it from memory. Well, St. Peter's at least. I'm Ben Gash, the voiceover artist for this series, and a painter and a musician from Berlin. I was asked to be your travel guide because I see the world roughly like yourselves and not like a living camera. When I draw, it's not a case of perfect reproduction. After only a few seconds, I've already forgotten how many columns there are in the square facing St. Peter's. What I draw isn't reality, but my interpretation of reality. What would happen, though, if I had Stephen's memory? If I had his merciless exactness of perception? Would I suddenly see the world with different eyes? Would I be a genius? A little Einstein?
In medicine, everything we know about health we've learned from the study of disease. And so I think everything we learn about the brain is probably going to come from the study of disordered brains. How is that different from normal function? And the Savant syndrome provides a unique window to the brain.
Human brains have been fascinated by what turns people into geniuses long before Isaac Newton put forward his law of gravity and, with a stroke of genius, made history. Monuments the world over stand as testaments to these giants.
Creativity is an act of rebellion, by definition. You have to be downright subversive to break the rules and to confront conventional wisdom, don't you? I mean, it's by definition that. And if everyone accepts what you're doing when you do it, you're obviously not on the forefront. I mean, you're doing something that's within the paradigm. I mean, to me, if everyone accepts what I'm doing, I'm in the wrong field. I might as well go to the beach.
Sydney University is one of the few places where Professor Alan Snyder no longer attracts much attention. No matter how hard he tries, with daring theories and experiments to break through the usual patterns of our perception, among conservative neuroscientists, this physics major has gained the reputation of being, to put it mildly, an eccentric. Alan Snyder's theories proved controversial until they started to be supported by those of other colleagues. Put simply, This is what Snyder says. Savants see the world as it really is, and not as we do through mindsets, the filters of our experiences. In savants, this filter system doesn't work. This is the filter in our heads that sorts the important from the irrelevant. Professor Snyder believes that this brain defect in savants is the key to exceptional creativity. When looking at Rome from the air, we fear we've sent Stephen Wiltshire on a mission impossible. After one 45-minute flight, he has only 3 days in which to draw a 5.5-yard panorama of the city, entirely from memory. Just looking at Rome overwhelms us. Perhaps for a moment we can grasp the spirit that shaped the Eternal City. Yet none of us would remember how many windows there are on a building, or how many columns there are around St. Peter's. Only Stephen Wiltshire looks at Rome like a digital camera would. But will his memory be big enough to allow Stephen to draw an absolutely precise view of this endlessly complex city? The amazing thing, Stephen starts the drawing as we would, with the Church of St. Peter's. But he doesn't do any sketches, nor roughing out of the space for the drawing. It's as if the panorama already existed within his head, with all the proportions, all the roads, all the details.
Van Gogh was a genius for the very same reasons, that he had this power of massive visualization. Persons with Asperger's syndrome are incredible visualizers. They're incredibly sensitive to color, and they can see color, they can see landscape much, much better than a person without this kind of artistic genius.
Since becoming a savant star, Stephen gets recognized in the street. His pictures are exhibited in galleries. He is now more attuned to the admiration of total strangers. And he's increased the range of his obsession. Instead of only cars and architecture, he now also paints scenes from US TV shows and people. The only thing he really dislikes are abstract discussions about art. For Stephen, the Tower Bridge remains the Tower Bridge. When Stephen first started to draw, he was a child and went to a special school for mentally retarded children in the London borough of Fulham. The jury of art competitions, which Stephen regularly won, couldn't believe that these drawings were really made by a child. From the very beginning, Stephen has drawn with 100% accurate perspective. Perfect, down to the very last detail.
He captures things that you wouldn't even think were there. And then you'd go back and say, oh yeah, gosh, I didn't even realize that was there. Was that building always there? Because, you know, sometimes you can live somewhere and not know there's a newspaper shop around the corner and it's been there for the past 15 years. But he'll capture that.
Seeing the world is not a passive process. We aren't cameras, not at all. And in fact, that's what makes computer vision so hard, because actually what we think we see is very, very different from the light falling on our senses.
Stephen Wiltshire is not Einstein. As with other savants, his talents are restricted to very limited fields. But the panorama of Rome, which he draws for us out of memory, is a real stroke of genius, or at least a little miracle. At the end of the second day, Stephen is a good halfway through his creation. At the end of the day, Stephen's arm begins to ache because of his uncomfortable drawing position. Yet he smiles all day and listens through his headphones to 70s disco music. Stephen doesn't talk much, but he is open and friendly. Some scientists fear that Stephen might be losing his talent as a living camera the more his social abilities improve, as Stephen's sister Annette explains. This has already happened to other savants, and even if we're sure he'll make it, Stephen is now untypically seized by doubts.
So I'm not sure if it's a scene I remember enough sometimes, and because if I'm not sure at the moment. So from all lots of details, a lot of remembrance of details of the area.
We've done a variety of tests over the last few years, and I think some of the obvious ones have been on visual memory. Interestingly, we haven't found that Stephen's visual memory is any more accurate than you would expect if you were testing someone with the same mental ability or perhaps even with the same diagnosis. But the minute you ask him to draw his responses, you see then exceptional, superior retention, accurate retention of visual material.
After 3 days of his drawing marathon, even Stephen Wiltshire starts to tire. He has filled in more than 5 yards of paper in fine pencil. He has been restlessly aligning window to window and house to house, because Stephen loves to be applauded for his art. In the left corner, he's finally reached the ruins of the Forum Romanum. Stephen's sister Annette is rejoicing with him. He's made it. Obviously, he's pleased with his work. Yet our vexing question still remains. How precise was Stephen's ability to memorize? Is it really true that you could only see a single curve of the Tiber from above? We started to compare the accuracy of the drawing with the real thing. Is Stephen's version of St. Peter's cupola too dominant? Yet here again, like with the curve of the Tiber, Stephen is frighteningly right. We wondered if the famous Roman hill should probably stand out more in Stephen's panorama. But again, Stephen had seen it better. From 1,000 feet up, the hills are, optically, almost level. Checking the Pantheon, we did discover some minor inaccuracies on the roof. But the number of columns of the portal is, again, absolutely correct. And, despite our doubts, Stephen has drawn one of the most complex buildings, the Colosseum, so precisely, it's practically a blueprint of reality. Stephen was also accurate in the instances we checked of nameless buildings and side streets. Had he had more time, his sister Annette believes, he would have put in even more detail.
Some of them areas of all of that part, lots of detailed, remembered things of the some of the cities and the neighborhoods and the villages. And then the easy part is St. Peter's and Forum and Colosseum, and memorize it by head and by memory.
After having spent 3 days in a marble room, Stephen and his sister Annette finally have the chance to discover Rome from the pedestrian perspective. Yet what makes Stephen Wiltshire a living camera remains unanswered. His mother has always refused to let his brain be examined with modern scanning techniques. She and Annette care much more about keeping Stephen's life as normal as possible.